it as a practice run. Now you get
That
it.
was the
Now you know
practice
what you
run.
don't talk about.
Okay, everybody, you're going to have to listen to me do that all again. But thank you for coming. This is the February 17th CDF online meetup. We do these monthly, and I generally have a kind of a humans of DevOps, and then I try to do a tool and more technical on the opposite months. This month we have Andreas Grabner, who is going to talk about Keptn, and Keptn is an events-based CD orchestration engine, which is a very timely discussion. The CD Foundation has recently, as of yesterday actually, announced a special interest group around events. I'm going to share my screen really quick here while people sign in. So this events charter, I'm just going to read what it is because it's really going to kind of announce and set the stage for Andy's presentation. Their charter says today's CI/CD systems do not talk to each other in a standardized way. This leads to problems related to interoperability, notification of failure issues, and poor automation. The charter for events in CD is looking at how events can help to create CI/CD systems with a decoupled architecture that's easy to scale and makes it resilient to failures. Using events could also increase automation when connecting workflows from different systems to each other, and as a result, empowering tracing, visualizing, auditing of the connected workflows through these events. So why this is important now is because we are beginning to see a pivot in what we call CI/CD. Now, anybody who's spoken to me before knows that I like to define what CI and CD is. Continuous integration was really focused around automating a pull request and a build and creating what we'd like to call a releasable candidate based on the build. Continuous delivery is the process of pushing the build through the life cycle, including security scanning and testing, and all of the events that make a CD pipeline. So events in CI/CD is really about creating this abstracted layer where we have a catalog of events that we can call. Now, in a microservices world, this becomes, in my opinion, more critical because not every microservice is the same, and we should be able to start generating a pipeline on the fly based on the risk level of a microservice. So those are kinds of the discussions that are starting to happen in the CI/CD world. Next month, we will have Fatih Degraminsi. He is the co-chair of the Special Interest Group in Interoperability for the CD Foundation, and he is beginning to have a conversation about policies that different tools support, policies that create guardrails. And I believe that we will see a convergence between this concept of events and policies moving forward. So I haven't got a date confirmed yet, but he will be our star for next month's event. It will not be a tools discussion. It really is going to be a discussion about what policies are and how those policies are going to start moving forward these guardrails. On that, I am going to stop sharing, and I am going to introduce Andy Grabner. Andy is, he'll introduce himself, but he is the kind of, I would say he's driving events through Keptn. I think events are a fabulous idea, and I think Dynatrace was ahead of all of us when they started thinking about it, and I believe that Andy was part of that initiative, and he knows everything about Keptn, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Andy.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's funny when you say this is all about events. Yes, Keptn is event-driven, but this is also an event now, right? We are here at a meetup, and so let's put up a good show. Yeah, as Tracy said, a day I am working for Dynatrace. I'm a self-proclaimed DevOps activist, where I like to initiate and activate the excitement about DevOps in people, because I think that whole movement is really interesting and really, can make a lot of impact. And if you get the right people motivated, then that helps. On the other side, I'm a DevRel for Keptn, the open source project. And I've been doing this for 2 years. Tracy, as you said, about 2.5 years ago, we actually sat down at Dynatrace with a group of customers, colleagues, and basically said, as we are all moving towards the cloud native world, And we as Dynatrace build an observability tool. We want to integrate all these different tools. And then we started building a demo, how we want the perfect end-to-end delivery pipeline to look like. And then we ended up building a Jenkins pipeline that had a lot of hard-coded integrations to make everything work. And then we saw, wow, this is great for our sample app, but we can never give this to a customer because it just works for our sample app, and it's going to be a massive undertaking to get this going. Now, folks, I encourage you to obviously ask questions, right, Tracy? We will have dedicated time at the end. But
yes, and I can open it up so anybody can ask a question on the fly if you'd like me to, or we can keep everybody muted until the end. It's totally up to you.
I'm happy to also take questions throughout, because I think that makes it a little more interactive. And we have seen so many pre-recorded sessions. I mean, we know this is live, but then for people that actually dedicate the time now to be live, it's a chance for them to ask questions right away.
So everyone, I am allowing you to talk, even though this generally stops you from being able to do that. So if you need to mute, you'll have to do that on your own. So you will be opened up to chat with Andy and ask him questions as we go.
Perfect. And I see there's things coming in the chat, so I'll try to keep an eye on it. But if I'm focused on my screen, Tracy, maybe
I will.
That is awesome. So I do have slides prepared, but I also have a demo, and I want to actually start with the demo and show you Keptn live. I can encourage you to check out our just recently updated website, keptn.sh. You can from here find all the information. You can find the information on GitHub. You can find Slack. I can encourage you to join our Slack channel, slack.keptn.sh. We also have a Slack channel on the CNCF Slack because we are a CNCF project. But what I have for you today, I have my standard Keptn instance. So in my case, Keptn is installed on a Kubernetes cluster. In my case, I've chose EKS. Now you will learn more as I go through my presentation later on about the structure of Keptn and the terminology and the architecture behind the scenes. But as a first project that I want to focus on today, it's called my Keptn 07 project. And what you see here is a link to a Git repo. So Keptn internally, everything you do with Keptn, every time you create a project, it creates a Git repository that is hosted within the Keptn installation. So we have a so-called configuration service that is basically Git repo. But you can also set up an upstream Git. And in my case, I have set this here to my Keptn 07 simple node upstream Git. If you want to, feel free to go to that URL. Actually, let me post it into the chat as well. There's nothing secret about it. It contains all the configuration of my sample project. In order to create a project in Keptn, and Keptn is really all about automating different workflows, different processes around continuous delivery, but also around automating operational tasks. So in my main use case today, I'm showing you a delivery use case, but I also show you how you can integrate different aspects of Keptn, like the quality gate capability, the performance test automation, chaos test automation, and quality gates, or even auto remediation in your existing pipelines. My example here, if you want to get started with Keptn, you have to create a so-called shipyard file. So the shipyard basically specifies declaratively what type of stages do you have. I have dev, staging, and prod, and also what should happen within that stage. So you can specify what type of deployment strategy, what type of test strategy you want. You can also specify, as Keptn is later executing that process and is moving an artifact through the different stages and then evaluating every artifact after tests been executed on whether the artifact should automatically be approved into the next stage if it has a pass mark, or if it's warning, maybe manual. So I've specified in staging, if something comes out of dev that passes, it will automatically be promoted in staging. If it's warning, I have to manually approve it. If it's failing, it doesn't make it into staging. For production, I have it a little different. I said everything that would be good out of staging, whether it's passed or warning state, I have to manually approve it. And what you also see here in production, I also have a remediation strategy. This is the whole automating processes around operations automation. So typically remediation. So the only thing you need is you say Keptn create project. Here is basically what we call the shipyard file, the definition of your delivery process. And what Keptn does with it, it will automatically for every stage create a branch dev prod staging. As you can see here, if I go to my staging branch, then the structure is like this. You have some artifacts that are considered kind of stage wide that can be used. But then, like in this case, I have some JMeter scripts that can be used for any type of microservice or service that are on board. But then I can also onboard a service which I call simple node, which is a single microservice. And in here, I have some specific additional config files that then the individual tools that Keptn will orchestrate and talk to through events, they can then access and can say, hey, okay, here are actually the JMeter scripts, the tests that should be used for test executions for the simple node service in the staging environment. What else do we have here? Helm, here are my Helm charts. I'm using Helm for deployment. I could also have Keptn reach out to other tools like Jenkins, Deploy Hub. I can let it reach out to Spinnaker, to Harness, any other tool. But in my case, I'm just using a service that comes with Keptn natively. It's just a Helm service. I also have SLOs in here. So service level objectives are really key because everything Keptn does at any stage during delivery and also during auto remediation, Keptn is pulling in your SLIs, your metrics from your observability platform, whether this is your Prometheus, whether this is your Dynatrace, your Datadog, your New Relic, whatever you have. And then it is comparing it against your objectives. And depending on that, it will then calculate a score, and based on then decides what do we need to do next. All right? So there's different things here that we all the different configuration elements. Now, as I told you, what I've done, I've created this project just with that YAML file that we call it the shipyard file, and I've onboarded a single service, which means in Keptn I immediately see dev, staging, and prod. Earlier in preparation of this demo, I have already deployed different versions of my microservice. So I've pushed version 3 now through dev, staging, and prod. So version 3 is here. I can get the link here to the ingress. So that means I can get direct access to my application that is deployed. I always say here, I don't get paid for building nice sample apps. This is a Node.js based app that is doing some things in the background, calling out to other external services. But in the end, these 3 builds are very similar, even though individual builds have different problems. So I can demo the capabilities of Keptn. So build 3 is in dev, in staging. I should also have build number 3. And then if I go to prod, build number 3 is here as well. Now this is just as a proof that build number 3 is now deployed. Now what can I do? I can kick off build number 4. So what I want to show you is one way to send Keptn an event and with this trigger a workflow that I want Keptn to automate for me. And in this case, and I'm kicking this off now, one of the ways is to use our CLI. So Keptn, the CLI, I say, Keptn, I'm sending you a new event, and it is a so-called new artifact event. That means for my Keptn 07 project, for this particular service within that project, I have a new image for you. And what Keptn is now doing, it is taking that initial event, is looking at my shipyard file, figures out that the first stage in my shipyard file is the dev stage, and then starts sending out events to then trigger the tools that I have kind of hooked into Keptn that can then do the individual tasks like deployment. Actually, first comes the configuration change. So let me actually look at this, right? I'm saying build number 4. That means if I go back to my Git repo and I'm going into dev, because this is the first stage. Then 1 minute ago, as you can see here in the Helm chart, I have magically somebody changed my values YAML file to build number 4. So the first thing that Keptn actually does, if you triggered it end-to-end delivery, it is asking, hey, which tool can actually make the configuration change that Andy wants to do, like changing the tag or whatever other metadata you have. And once this is done, then the next thing happens, like the actual deployment. So I've kicked this off, as you can see here. And just to show you what else I have here, I have a kube, I have Kubernetes, right? Obviously installed, I have it running here. I have my Keptn, that's a default namespace where Keptn runs. In the Keptn namespace, so you can also see that in my case, the way you're plugging in your individual tools to listen for these events, you have to install what we call a Keptn service. It's basically nothing else than a proxy that is receiving an event from Keptn and then is, calling, let's say, your external tool, or we have some services kind of, built in, like we have a Helm service that can do Helm deploys. We have a JMeter service that can run the JMeter tests. We have a notification service that can send notifications to Slack. So one thing I should see here, I have my Slack integration, and then I can see at 8:14, this was like 2 minutes ago PM, local time here in Austria. Yes, it is that late, that's why it's dark. I had the initial configuration change to build number 4, the deployment already finished, and then also the tests have already been executed. There was a performance quick test. So these are all the tools that are kind of, engaged now. If I go back to Keptn, I have one way to look at the event stream, right? It's an event-driven system. So if I click on services here, then remember I told you in my Keptn project, I have one service called Simple Node. And earlier, as you can see here, I do a lot of demos and I always flip between version 1, 2, 3, 4, then back to version 1, 2, 3, and now it's version 4. So what you see here is, this is the initial, we call it the root event that was sent into Keptn. I did it through the CLI in the Keptn's bridge. This is the UI that you see here. You can actually see our event format. We're using cloud events, and we basically use a standard convention about what type of events do we have, a configuration change, a deployment, a test start, and so on. And then every event then has additional data. Like in this case, right, this was passed in with Andy wants to switch to version number 4 for this particular project, for this particular service. And Keptn is taking that event and is then kind of executing the workflow based on the shipyard file. And for instance, the next thing was that the Helm service came in and said, hey, there's a configuration change. So I want to do the deployment. So now here, I actually get to see the event that then the Helm service, so it could also be Deploy Hub, it could be Jenkins, it could be anything that was first received an event from Keptn, consumed it, executed the action, and once that tool was done, sending back the event to Keptn like, hey, Keptn, I just want to make you aware that I finished the deployment, I am the Helm service, and by the way, here is the deployment URI local within the Kubernetes cluster, and here is the public URL. And so on and so forth. And then the process goes on. As you can see here, tests were executed, again, by events. SLIs were then retrieved. This is kind of the standard process of Keptn, retrieving SLIs to figure out, is this a good build or a bad build, by reaching out to your testing tools, reaching out to your monitoring tools, and then deciding good build or not a good build. Okay, so quick overview. So, that's
a quick question for you.
Yeah.
How do you set up the relationship that the test case, the test must wait for the deployment to finish?
So the test does not start until the deployment tool sends an event to Keptn that the deployment is actually finished. So from a sequence flow, you have a so-called configuration changed event. That means, hey, I have a new configuration in Git, like say I have updated my Helm charts. This is an event that your deployment tool would listen to because it knows I need to deploy or apply a change configuration to the actual target system. In my case, Helm is doing this. So Helm is then deploying, and in my case, the deployment tool also needs to make sure that the deployment finished, and when it is finished, it then sends the deployment finished event. And by default, now you can also completely change that flow as well if you want to, especially with our new version, Keptn 0.8, which comes out in about 2-3 weeks. But the default is the deployment tool sends deployment is finished with the information about here is the public accessible URI for that thing that I've deployed. And then the testing tool would say, okay, I am reacting to that deployment finished event, because now it's time to execute tests. And then once the tests are done, then the testing tool, in my case JMeter, sends back an event that says, hey, tests are finished. My overall result, my fast assessment is the tests have passed. And once this is done, then Keptn continues with reaching out to the observability platform and then is pulling in more metrics, right? You can then pull in all sorts of data for that particular time frame. Does this
Got it.
answer your
Perfect.
question? Yeah.
Nope, that answered it. Thank you.
Perfect. Cool. All right. So this was a quick overview of just, how Keptn looks and feels. Let me just go back to where is my, there we go, my slides. All right. So what is Keptn? Keptn is actually, I think, much more than what I just showed you, because I think it's different things for different people. So depending on who you are, what you can really do with Keptn allows you to automate the use case that you want to automate, where you may right now do things manual. Like quality gates is the number one use case we currently see our adopters, which is instead of me having to look at your test reports or whatever else you have to figure out this is a good or a bad deployment after the tests are run, we can automate that. We can do a progressive delivery, what I've just shown, the end-to-end use case. We also have a use case that we call Sre Automation. This is all about you have an application or service deployed, and then Keptn can orchestrate the execution of a performance test like the G-meter test I showed you. But then we also work very closely with the chaos engineering community. So you can, while the load tests are running, also enforce chaos and then validate again, is the system behaving to even under chaotic situations within your defined service level objectives. And then the last use case that we see is auto remediation. So if a problem comes in from your monitoring tool, let's say you get a Prometheus alert, Keptn can then execute not a remediation workflow with deploy, test, evaluate, but a remediation workflow, which will be execute this action and then evaluate if it solved the problem. If not, execute the next one. If that didn't solve it, maybe then send a Slack message or inform somebody. So you pick the use case. Every use case has its own configuration. You already saw earlier the shipyard file, the SLIs, SLOs, workloads for load testing, runbooks for the remediation. So you bring this to Keptn into the config repo. And then the beauty of, and I think this is also where Tracy, I think, got really excited when she heard about Keptn, is we connect to your tools through a standard protocol. And which means you bring your tool that make most sense for your environment, because every microservice is different, every environment is different. Also, while Keptn itself runs on Kubernetes, it can trigger all of these different tools that do things in any type of environment. We have a lot of folks that are currently triggering Jenkins pipelines as part of the delivery that are deploying some Java enterprise app somewhere. Right? We are not constrained to Kubernetes. This is also important. So what Keptn really does, it automates the configuration of your tools by providing them the specification that you brought in, and it's orchestrating these processes around the use case that you picked. And it does all of this in a declarative way. Everything is stored in Git. Everything is version controlled. SLOs are core to everything we do. I will get to this in a second, more detail. And very important, bottom right, standards. The communication protocol between Keptn and all these different tools is based on cloud events. And we're very excited that the special interest group exists now, where we can bring in our thoughts, and then hopefully we all as an industry come up with a standard, and then we can finally get rid of all these custom integrations that we all built and have to maintain. As I said, this is Keptn, and currently we have a lot of different Keptn users that are using Keptn for different things. Sumit at Intuit, he's a principal engineer, and he's using Keptn in combination with Argo, Gatling, and Jenkins for large-scale distributed performance testing. He's also very heavily involved with chaos engineering, but basically what they are using Keptn for is automated quality gates. So every time they run their performance tests, they automatically then use Keptn for the quality gate evaluation. Roman, managing director at Triscon, they are a performance consulting company, and they are using Keptn to orchestrate performance test execution and analysis, and they're primarily automation tools that they see in their custom accounts is Jenkins and Azure DevOps, and they're using Neoload as a tool. And the last one is Christian from ERT, a clinical trial company. He's a senior DevOps engineer. They have moved over to GitLab, using GitLab for their delivery pipelines, and now Keptn is really orchestrating all of these different tools. So instead of them having to build all the integrations from GitLab to JMeter and to Catalan, they just use Keptn for the whole orchestration of the stuff that happens after GitLab builds the container, and then Keptn takes it and does the whole delivery automation. So you can see, you can use Keptn for different things depending on where it currently makes most sense for you, what you want to automate. Now, what drove the Keptn architecture? We looked at the way we built our own pipelines when we moved to Kubernetes and to container-based architectures, and we saw that most of our pipelines were basically nothing else than what we learned from the past when we built pipelines for monolithic systems. So we used Jenkins, and while Jenkins is a great tool, I'm not bashing on it, but the way we used it, we basically had, obviously mixed information about what delivery process do we have, the target platforms, the environment, everything is hard-coded and there's no clear separation of concern. And so what we said, how can we solve this? Because this is not maintainable, because we ended up with many different copies of that same pipeline, just with small permutations. And then we started building our own libraries to kind of extract things into higher level. And then again, Jenkins can do a lot of things, but we ended up spending a lot of time. So we said the real solution for it would be to kind of look at this process that we typically build in a pipeline. And then just as we are breaking up monolithic applications into smaller pieces and having somebody that then orchestrates the business process, we said, well, why not look at the process, look at the individual steps, and then the individual tools, what type of capabilities do these tools actually provide, and then just separate them and rip them apart, and then use eventing to connect them. And this is exactly what we've built. So we allow you to specify the process on the left. We allow you to specify which capabilities you have on the right. So what type of tools provide which type of capability. And then as Keptn is orchestrating the process, it sends out the event with the right metadata, like, hey, I need somebody that can deploy container number 1 into the dev stage with blue and green. And then you may have one or even more tools that can do this. And then they can say, hey, Keptn, yes, I can do it. And I say one or more tools. This is something that is now coming with Keptn 0.8, which is close to release. You are then also able to then, individual tools can say, yes, I can do it. They can stand a start event. And then Keptn also knows whom to wait for. So that's something we're building in new now to better control the flow and also better support multiple capabilities on the right side of tools that can participate in the workflow, right? But in the end, very simple. Process on the left and who consumes the events, or I'd like them to call them almost capabilities, the tools on the right side. So this drove our architecture. That means if you install Keptn, I've showed you earlier on my Kubernetes cluster, you get the Keptn control plane, the core component that you install that also comes with the whole eventing. If you want to use Keptn, you then do exactly what I've showed you. You create a project and then you specify the workflow. And there's two types of workflows. The one is around CI/CD, or let's say continuous delivery, not CI, continuous delivery. This is where you specify the shipyard file and you specify what type of process do you want to automate in delivery. Or you can use Keptn for auto remediation. This is where you specify a remediation file and say, Keptn, I want you to listen to alerts from the monitoring tool. And then depending on the alert that comes in, I want you to send the events to trigger these types of actions. So you define your process, your application plane, and then on the other side, you may have even different people in your organization that then specify the tools in the so-called execution plane. And this is also what's new now with the current version that I'm showing is Keptn 0.7.3. That's the latest released version. In this one, control and execution plane is together on one Kubernetes cluster with 0.8, which is currently in alpha. You can install the control plane on one cluster and then your execution plane also in different cluster, allowing you to true multi-cluster, multi-target, multi-cloud processes, right? Whether this is around deployment or testing, then it's up to you. But the execution plane basically is what I showed you earlier. This is where you plug in your individual capabilities, your tools. They're listening to the events and then acting upon the events as Keptn sends them. And an event or a workflow is triggered by, let's say, a developer who says, I have a new artifact, sends the event like I did earlier with my Keptn CLI, and then Keptn is orchestrating that process, sending out events, waiting for the responses from these tools, and then depending on that, making a decision on how to go forward. And the nice thing about this is you have a clear separation between process and tooling. You can always change the process without breaking any hard-coded integrations, because there are no hard-coded integrations with the tools. And you can also change and swap the tooling on the bottom without having to think, where is this tool currently used?
Andy, in terms of, creating industry standards, the control plane is what's gotten my attention. Where in this architecture, in terms of like the event SIG, where do you think that they should be focusing some of their standards in this architecture?
Exactly here on the events. So basically, right, if you think back of my Keptn's bridge, I think the events that need to be specified and standardized are exactly those that
So in the payload that's getting passed around has to be standardized?
Exactly. I think that's what we should standardize, where we should come up with a standard set of events, like what type of events do we even want, right? What do we need? We need a configuration change event, we have a deployment event, we have a test event, we have an evaluation event, we have a promotion event, we have a problem event, a remediation event, and so on. There's different events we currently have for different activities in your workflows. And we have started in Keptn, because we've been doing this for like a year and a half or 2 years now, we came up with different types of events, all the specs that we have. And I know that, right, I mean, we have folks like Andreas Grabner and some others in the CDF, and hopefully also in the standardization group. But here, let me also put this over, right? This is where we are documenting all of our events that we are using, the Keptn cloud events. So everything is based on cloud events, but then we have our own definition of, for instance, a deployment event, right? What information is there? And I think this should be put into consideration when the SIG is now discussing what events should be standardized and what should be part of the payload. What do we need, right?
Thank you. That's helpful.
I think I posted the link in the chat window. Exactly. Also, I think Steve, did this answer your question too?
Yes, I have another question. If you
so,
how does Keptn handle? Let me back up a little bit. So a use case that we have is we have a customer that has 17 QA environments for a single project.
Mm-hmm.
And then within each one of those QA environments, there's multiple clusters. Mm-hmm. How is that data represented in Keptn or in the Git repo that Keptn's working from?
That is a good question. So I think right now, just hearing what you said, we have the concept of stages here. Let me just go back to my shipyard file.
Yeah, I remember you talking about the different branches. Each branch was a stage.
Exactly. Each branch is a stage, and then in every stage you will then get. Now in my current version here, right, in Keptn 07, we have a very opinionated way what happens within a stage. It is a configuration change, a deploy, a test, and an evaluate, and then either a promote or a reject, depending on that result. With Keptn 0.8, the next one, you can actually then specify individual sequences within a stage where you can kind of break out of our very opinionated way. So I see two options for your scenario. You could model every of your 7 QA stages as individual stages.
Right.
That means you have Q1, Q2, and so on and so forth.
Right.
That means, or the other one would be you, with Keptn 0.8, you can then say you have a single QA stage, but within that, you have one, we call it sequences. You have one sequence that first does the QA1 testing, then the QA2 testing, QA3 testing, and you can then actually specify these sequences. So the idea, let me just see if I can quickly find the spec here as well, because I hope I am not. Let me just do this here. Keptn 08, 8 spec. There is also already some videos out there that I can suggest, and I'm not sure if I find all the. No, I mean, but the idea would be like this. You would have a stage QA, and then in here you would have sequence QA1, where you would have as a first task test, and then evaluate, and then you would have a sequence QA2 that is triggered by QA1.successful. Right?
Okay.
That's
I see where you're going with it.
Yeah. So that would be one option. Or the other option would just really be, as I said, you have just a stage, all QA, and then in here you have test Q1, test Q2, and so on. It's up in the end. Or actually, you have multiple stages. Sorry, you have QA1, and then you have another stage that would be QA2.
Right.
I think that's different. We probably need to look into this, what makes most sense.
And then how is the, this goes more along on the deployment side instead of on the test side. I guess it would apply to tests too. But if you have multiple clusters in the each QA stage, and they each have unique data that need to be passed to that cluster, where is that managed?
So the data, the way this works, if you have different clusters, you basically install the execution plane on these clusters. And then the execution plane is basically saying, hey, I am cluster ABC, and I'm interested in events that have, certain metadata. So if I go back to
I get it. So the cluster's control plane is going to provide information back and query
the remote
stuff to look for.
Exactly, the remote cluster. So that you have a central control plane, right? The control plane would be centralized, and you would have multiple execution planes, and then it's a polling mechanism. So that means if you have 10 different clusters, they would basically say, hey, Keptn, do you have anything new for me? And new for me means, do you have anything that needs to be done on this particular cluster, in this particular project, in this particular environment? So it's a pull. That's the way it works. Yeah.
So it's a pull version then.
It's a pull version. The remote ones are pulling. Exactly. It's not a push, it's a pull. And remember that we have the Git repository. So that means in the Git repository, let's say for your, I don't know, let's say staging stage, right? If this would be your QA, then for every service, and let's say JMeter, right? That would be a good example. Then in here, you can specify configuration files that are then accessible by that remote tool that runs on that remote cluster, and then pull in, let's say, your test files. But you can, at least this is the way we have done it currently with JMeter, and this can be done with other tools as well. You basically here specify what should really actually be executed, what type of test should be executed with how many virtual users and so on, depending on what we call test strategy. And test strategy is nothing else than another piece of metadata on these events. So when you're sending an event and you say, first, I want to execute my, let's say, performance quick tests, then Keptn sends an event and says, who can run performance quick tests? And then your listeners in that environment says, yes, I can do it. And I also know based on that description that I need to execute this particular script with these types of virtual users and loop count and so on. So it's all metadata that then comes as part, right, as you can see here, performance quick, as part of these events.
Got it.
Cool.
Just to add to that, Andy, I wanted to understand, can the sequences be executed in parallel?
The sequences are not in parallel right now. So right now there's a sequence that is executing its individual tasks. And once the sequence is finished, either successfully or failed, it depends on the outcome of the individual tasks, this then triggers other sequences that are waiting for that trigger, which means you can do some type of parallelization. If you have one sequence and then you have, let's say, 3 other sequences waiting for that to finish, then they would go off and would then do their stuff in parallel. So a good example would be you run your dev and your staging with all your testing, and then you have 5 production environments, and you wanna do this all individually through individual, but in parallel maybe, but with some specific notifications. Then yes, these processes would run in parallel because they all get triggered by the same sequence finished. I hope this makes sense, what I'm saying.
Yeah, so you're having a single event trigger multiple actions then. Is that what you're trying to get at?
Exactly. Yeah, you can define your sequences, and a sequence always gets triggered by some other sequence being finished. So that means you can create your, let's say, your test sequence in your testing stage, and then you have different production stages, and they all get triggered if the testing sequence in the testing stage finishes. So we have, for instance, one of our customers or users, they are using this for doing multi-stage delivery at the same time, right? So they have they have their QA pipeline, and once that is done, then they know they can roll it out to their different SaaS environments, to the different deployments that they have for different end users. And Keptn is going to do this for them in parallel, even though for every single production sequence, then they are engaging with what you'll see here, a so-called approval process. So, right, if I look at this, I have dev, staging, and prod, but what they have is prod 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now the process continues, right? Basically, I have 5 then parallel streams going on, but what I have done here, I have manual interaction to then let's say a human decide, do I really want to, I know it's good to go, but do I really want to do this? Yes or no? And promote it to production. I hope this makes sense. I know it's a little hard to draw with my fingers in the air, but it would be something like, right, there's another prod here and another prod here and another prod here. And so if this is finished, it triggers this, at the same time this, and this. But in prod itself, whether this is prod 1, 2, 3, or 4, you can then have a sequence that first, let's say, includes a Slack notification or asking a human, hey, do you really want to approve this into production, yes or no?
Okay, that's great.
And you now also see that I do not only get not paid for building good sample apps are beautiful, but also I'm not getting paid for drawing. Because clearly not good.
I am so with you. I do terrible at drawing.
So,
and I think drawing with your fingers in the air works just fine, actually.
Okay.
So one other question I have is, and I don't know if you have a hierarchy, but let's say I wanted to insert after the build of a container, I want to insert a new event to do security scanning, and I want to do that across all my projects in my organization. Do I have to, is there a hierarchical, like a Git repository that's higher up that I can do that in one place and everybody then gets it?
Not
or
right
do
now.
I go?
No, not right now. So we don't have a kind of an inheritance right now. That means what you can do, obviously, through automation, you can just update the shipyard file in your GitHub repositories. But remember, we are on Keptn 0.7, approaching 0.8. So I think these are also things that definitely would make sense. Now you can do it by, right, if you have, let's say, 10 GitHub repositories for your different Keptn projects, you can then just update your shipyard file and then just say, hey, between here and here, I now have a sequence that is called security, and I want to run a security check. So I'm going to send out, But I know what you mean, right? What you say is kind of like
a global include, parent or
exactly. Not maybe in the backlog already, but we have a solution. It means you can update it, but you have to do it in all the Git repos. But you can automate that, obviously. But maybe something for a future out-of-the-box capability.
Got it.
Good. I wonder. So where did I stop? Let me think about this. I stopped at explaining to you the architecture and how all this looks like. Now, let me go back to the demo that I kicked off earlier. Now, as you remember, we've been here. So when I kicked off build number 4, then on the right side, you see all the chain of sequences, right? Def was there. Then it got into staging. In staging, configuration change happened. The deployment happened. That means build number 4 is now also in staging. This is great. Then what happened? A longer performance test ran. So in this, a Helm service deployed, then a performance test executed with test strategy performance peak. That means that test ran about 4 minutes from 2020 to 2024. And then SLI retrieval started again. And in this case, you can see the SLIs, which is a key component to Keptn, is now a little bit more, well, much more than the SLI on SLO validation in Def. In Def, we only had a simple check that basically said, did JMeter execute and did JMeter report back everything is good? And if that was good, then it was considered good. However, in staging, we've expanded this. You can see here there's a lot of, we call them SLI, service level indicators, that Keptn is retrieving from my observability tool, and then it's comparing every single SLI against my objectives. Now, where does this data come from? In my case, it comes from my observability platform, which is Dynatrace, right? I work at Dynatrace during the days. Obviously, I use my tool of choice. So I have my Kubernetes cluster or clusters instrumented with Dynatrace. I get fully all the metrics from Kubernetes, but also the service that I deploy, the containers. So I've created a simple dashboard that says, I'm interested in response time, right? I'm a performance engineer, so I'm definitely interested in response time, P95, the 95th percentile, the 90th and the 50th. Then we also have a capability here to look at response times split by individual test cases. So my JMeter script executes a version, a homepage, an echo, and invoke. Now, if you remember my sample app, this is the echo, the invoke. So my JMeter script is kind of simulating all these different use cases. And now in Dynatrace, I have response time, failure rate, as well as number of external service call or backend service calls as a metric per test case. I have transactional failure rate overall. I also have some process CPU and so on and so forth. And what I've also done, I have augmented that dashboard. You can see here, if I zoom in a little bit, I basically said, this should be an SLI. So while this dashboard looks nice, and I maybe would normally look at this dashboard to validate if the build is good or the data from that time frame when the test run was good, I can now say, I don't want to do this manually. I want Keptn to do it. This is why I can specify pass criteria, and I can do a combination of a fixed value, like it should be faster than 600 milliseconds, but I can also do relative value. Plus 10% means it's comparing it with the previous good build and says it will pass if it is smaller than plus 10% from the previous baselines. And it should also be faster than 600. So I can actually combine things, and I can do pass criteria. And if I scroll to the right here, I can also specify pass and warning criteria. I can also give different weights. So I can make individual SLIs have more of an impact to the overall score than others. And I can even mark individual ones as key criteria, like this one here. The failure rate is a so-called key metric. That means if this one fails, regardless how good the other metrics are, it will fail the build. And so if I go back to my Keptn bridge, every single row here is basically one of these metrics that were pulled out from my dashboard, and the green, yellow, and red depends on how the evaluation was done. And then the top row is the overall score. And it seems in this case, I achieved 100%, all the points. That's great. I can see the individual results also as its values. I can also see them as, like obviously I can chart it so I can see trends over time. But the thing is, it automatically makes the decision for me. And now it tells me, hey, guess what? We have a new build for you that would be ready to go, but it's currently waiting because you've specified, if you remember again, if I go back to my shipyard file, I have specified in my shipyard file that in order to enter production, the approval strategy is always manual. I don't let anything automatically approve into prod. So I always need, I'm always asked. And this is why I get the question here. And I either get the question here, or if I click to this view where I have dev, staging, and prod, I see version 3 is still in prod. That means if I open up that link, the current version is still build number 3. But Keptn tells me there's a new version available. It achieved 100 points. What do you want to do? And then I say, sure, go. And now it continues the workflow by sending the next event to do the actual deployment, to then do the testing in production. And because I'm doing a blue-green deployment in production, because I've specified that my deployment tool should do blue-green after it has been deployed and after the tests are executed, it will then automatically remediate back to the previous build in case there's a problem with it. This is also what's happening. And again, if this is done by the Helm service or if it's done by some other deployment tool, as long as the tools that you have provide this capability, you can use this. You can use Keptn to orchestrate this type of process. All right, which means, I know, Tracy, we've almost used 1 hour, and I do have a couple of slides left, but I think I want to kind of jump ahead because I've explained a lot of things already, especially around SLIs and SLOs. But do you give me 5 more minutes?
Absolutely. Take what you need.
Okay, cool. So one thing that I want to really, this is what I like about Keptn, right? It is, sorry, it was one slide too fast, too far. So I just showed you a key component of Keptn. This is the quality gate evaluation based on SLOs. And whether you use Dynatrace or Prometheus, Keptn can pull in the data from different data providers. But the power of this is that this quality gate capability is not only used in Keptn as part of the whole end-to-end delivery workflow, you can also use it individually, because we don't want to push Keptn on you and say, now you have to use Keptn end-to-end and connect all of your different tools at once. We also say, hey, like Christian, they have GitLab as their pipeline where they do build, deploy, test, and then in the verify stage, they simply call Keptn and say, hey, the first thing I want to do and what I want to model, what I want to automate with Keptn is the process of evaluating my quality gates. And so you can also use Keptn just for this particular process. And the way this looks like, I have another project here that is just called quality gate. So in this case, I have, my entry points here that kick off a process in Keptn is not the configuration change. It is a so-called evaluation started. So in this case, the overall end-to-end process is much smaller. Here I had Jenkins triggering an evaluation. So the event that was sent in was basically sent from Jenkins. And basically it said, hey, Keptn, please start an evaluation. I want you to do an evaluation of the Keptn project, this service, and this stage for this time frame between start and end. And then Keptn is basically doing just this piece. It is reaching out to the monitoring tool that is configured or is listening. In this case, it's Dynatrace. And then it's pulling in those metrics, right? This is now just a different dashboard. But what I wanted to show you is that you can, there you go, reset. Yeah. Come on, reset. You can put in whatever tool you want, and you can just use the quality gate capability on its own. That's what I wanted to say. And then from there, maybe go into quality gate and testing, and then maybe the whole delivery process. That's also possible. Good. Last, before I drive it home, before I finish, the last use case which I really like is also data-driven operations. So I've talked about this, but one use case is that if you have your production monitoring and alerting, and you get a problem reported by your, let's say, Prometheus alert, then Keptn can also execute and orchestrate the so-called remediation workflow. So what you see on the left now is no longer the shipyard file where it specifies stages and actions within the stages or sequences, but here you specify the so-called remediation workflow. Now in this case, Keptn sees there's a conversion rate dropped error coming in, and the user has specified, hey, if a conversion rate dropped event comes in, then the first thing I would do is scale up. So what Keptn does, it's not scaling up itself, it sends out an event that is called scaling. And then it would trigger whatever tool is listening to it. And then the important thing here is we also integrated our quality gates, meaning for auto remediation, it is exactly as important to validate how is the system doing. So executing an action, then validating. If it's good, great, remediation done. If not, the next action will be executed. And then again, reevaluate it. If good, awesome, problem solved. If not, you would have the option to then escalate it, let's say, to a human being. But you can automate and remediate through Keptn workflows. And while this is great, and a lot of people like this, a lot of people are also scared about it, because why do you trust this automation in production? And this is where I believe we have such a great opportunity to work with the chaos engineering with community, because we can do what I like to actually now call test-driven operations, meaning using Keptn to run load, but also chaos, because we can do both. We have integrations with Litmos and with Gremlin. So Keptn can run load, enforce chaos, allows you to validate that your alerting works correctly. And then if your alerting, your monitoring sends an alert, you can then use Keptn to kind of start defining, refining, battle testing your remediation actions. Because basically what you're doing here, you're trying to test and validate that the application that is currently deployed in a QA environment or in a test environment that is put under stress and under chaos can bring itself back to a healthy state, even under chaotic situations. And the nice thing with this is you can test this as part of a delivery pipeline. And if it withstands the test, it means, hey, you know, actually not only good to deploy that artifact that you've been testing into production, but you should also promote that remediation workflow into production, because if chaos strikes in production, you're now safe that this has been tested and works. So to wrap it up, hopefully it is clear or clearer what Keptn is, different use cases through configuration by connecting your tools, and Keptn automates these use cases by connecting the tools through events. At the core, we have SLOs. Everything Keptn does will be evaluated. And we have some tutorials to get started with. You can go to tutorials, keptn.sh. But yeah, there's more things you can find out on our website, on Git, and it would be, you know, I think we still have a lot of things ahead with the SIG here on eventing. And Tracy, really great that you are driving this.
Andy, that was really an amazing presentation. So everyone, Andy's not just a great presenter and educator. He also is part of the Pure Performance podcast. He and his cohort, Brian Wilson, run that. And their last one, they had Dave Farley. And it was a really good podcast. And I am going to post that in the chat in case anybody's interested in following Andy and Brian on their podcast, because there's some pretty interesting information that goes on there.
Thank you. Well, we also had you, right? Don't be shy.
It was fun too. I'm looking forward to having another one. I want to do one on GitOps.
Yeah, we'll do.
And is there any other questions? I know we've had some great questions, but there may be some out there that are still outstanding. If you want to post them in the QA, or you can just reach out and ask them live. And I did post the Zoom link to the next event, the SIG for the events in CICD. That will be March 1st. It is at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 Eastern, and I have put the Zoom link there. If you're interested in getting involved in that group, I know that we are all pretty excited about it, and the more minds, the better.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you, Anderson. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
All right, I will take silence as a key to end the session. Andy, thank you. We really, really appreciate you joining us today. And I look forward to having a lot more conversations around this topic in the future.
Yeah, we should. We will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.